Have you ever wondered if there is something or someone that precedes the God you believe in? Perhaps you've never dared to voice this question aloud. Perhaps it resides silently in the depths of your heart, hidden among the other doubts you've learned to hush. Because there are pains we don't verbalize, fears we prefer not to name, like the unsettling dread that what if the God of the Bible is merely a late manifestation? What if there was something before him? A greater force, an older divinity, a more remote principle? This thought, though never declared, haunts from afar and touches precisely that part of our being that longs for absolute certainty, that cries out for unshakable metaphysical stability. If God had a beginning, who guarantees that our faith is not just another fragile, fleeting human construct? Take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a moment and feel the weight of this question pressing on your chest. It is not merely a theological doubt, but an existential restlessness that has inhabited the soul since the first humans gazed at the night sky and asked, "Who placed these stars here?" The human longing has always been to discover what came before, what existed in the before the beginning. The human heart, mine, yours, has always yearned to touch what is eternal, always sought the ultimate origin, always been anguished by the possibility that what it believes in may not be the true foundation. That's why today I invite you to embark on a journey, an inner journey, not to reinforce dogmas, not to repeat what you've already heard, not to simply comfort the mind, but to go beyond, to walk through the same desert Moses traversed. That man who also sought the origin, who dared to ask God, "Who are you?" and who, from the midst of the burning bush, heard the most enigmatic, most powerful, most definitive answer. "I am who I am." Exodus 3:14. Notice this. Before receiving the mission, before liberating Israel, before becoming the great prophet, Moses had to undergo the experience of total surrender. He had to strip himself of all prior conceptions of the divine. It wasn't enough to repeat what he had learned in Egypt, nor to believe what he had heard among the Hebrews. He had to empty himself to hear the true voice. And so it will be with you today. I invite you to leave behind assumptions, absolute certainties, the fears you don't always admit to having, and to walk through the dry land of doubt toward revelation. Because there are questions we cannot avoid, mysteries we cannot silence, spiritual pains that must be exposed to the light so that we may at last breathe in relief and say, "I have found the eternal rock." So now, with your heart exposed, your soul laid bare, walk with me. Let us together decipher what lies behind the question few dare to ask, but many carry deep within. Was there a God before the God of the Bible? Perhaps you've never expressed it, but there is, hidden in some corner of your soul, a persistent restlessness you carry without realizing. What if the faith that sustains your life is, in truth, just a late invention? What if the God you've learned to love and fear is just one among many, a name among countless others, a narrative among thousands that humanity created to try to explain the unexplainable? This fear, this almost unspeakable dread, acts as a silent spiritual block. It's not the explicit fear of condemnation or death, but something subtler, deeper, the fear that the God of the Bible might be just one among many ancient deities. At some point, you may have come across texts, theories, or confusing sermons mentioning strange names: El, Elohim, Baal, Asherah, divinities that inhabited the imagination of ancient peoples and somehow seemed to intertwine with the biblical narrative. And then, discomfort arises. Is my faith truly firm, or is it fragile, illusory, just another chapter in the long history of human religions? The spiritual pain here is not an intellectual doubt, it's not an academic question, but an emotional fear that if there were other gods before, then perhaps the God of the Bible is not enough. Perhaps he is just a late manifestation. Perhaps my hope is built on sand. But listen, this fear does not reveal weakness in your faith. It does not betray a hopeless soul. On the contrary, it points to something deeper, a legitimate spiritual need, the need to purify your spiritual imagination. Because the fear that God is not the first is not a sign of lost faith, but a signal that the time has come for a journey, for spiritual maturity, for liberation from the need to compare the living God with dead gods. Faith is not an echo of ancient myths, nor an unconscious repetition of human narratives. Faith is the soul's response to the God who speaks, the God who reveals himself, the God who simply is. That's why we move forward without fear, deepening our gaze, purifying our images, crossing the desert of fear until we find the eternal rock. There is something hidden in the very language of the Bible, something that at first glance may seem confusing, even disturbing, but which in truth is a powerful spiritual key. In Genesis 1:1 it is written, "In the beginning Elohim created the heavens and the earth." Elohim, a plural term used to designate the one God. How can a plural express the one? Perhaps upon hearing this, you felt discomfort, unease, fear. Does the Bible itself admit the existence of multiple gods? Could it be that, after all, there isn't just one? But breathe and see with spiritual eyes what the ancient rabbis, wise men who delved into the mystery of the text, always affirmed. The plurality does not point to a multiplicity of gods, but to the majesty, the complexity, the unfathomable greatness of the one God. It is not confusion, but revelation, a plural that expresses fullness, a plural that reveals infinity, and yet a perfect, irreducible, absolute unity. This is where one of the most challenging theses arises, proposed by scholars like Michael Heiser, the idea of a divine council. Spiritual beings, real but subordinate to the supreme God. They are not gods in the absolute sense, but created, subject, limited entities. They exist, but not as rivals, not as threats, not as superior forces. They exist as servants, as instruments, as echoes, but not as the origin. Yes, there were and are other Elohim. Yes, there are spiritual beings, powers, forces that act and even demand human worship. But, and here is the breaking of expectations, none of them existed before or above the God of Israel. None. And here lies the spiritual liberation, discerning between the eternal God and limited spiritual entities, ceasing to confuse the Creator with the creature, letting go of the anxiety of searching elsewhere for what can only be found in Him, in the One, in the Holy, in the I Am. Since the beginning, humanity has always projected, always imagined, always created myths, gods, narratives to try to explain the origin of the cosmos, the meaning of life, the destiny of the soul. The Sumerians with their ancestral gods, the Egyptians with their complex pantheon, the Canaanites with their local deities. All created images, names, rituals, stories that fascinated but also imprisoned. And then come the ancient accounts, like the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, with its gods emerging from chaos, fighting, dying, and giving rise to the world. And perhaps upon hearing these stories, you thought, is my faith just another one of these? One among many? Just another myth among countless others? But listen with your heart. Humanity projects its own limitation when it imagines that divinity needs to evolve or arise from another. Limited, finite humans fear the infinite and thus create gods in their own likeness, with a beginning, with an end, with flaws, with passions. But the Bible never said that, never. On the contrary, the Bible has always pointed with firmness, clarity, and reverence. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Psalm 92. There was no beginning for God. There was no origin. There was no moment when He was not. While pagan gods were part of the cosmos, created by natural forces, the God of the Bible is the creator of the cosmos. He does not arise, He does not evolve, He does not struggle to exist, He simply is. And this is the radical difference, the difference that liberates, the difference that heals, the difference that consoles. You don't need to seek new hidden divinities or esoteric systems as if they held something more original, purer, or more primal. There isn't. It doesn't exist. There is only the eternal God, who always was, who always will be, who is always present, calling, loving, sustaining, even when you doubt, even when you fear, even when you remain silent. Few perceive, few dare to admit that the finite, limited human mind deeply resists the idea of something or someone without a beginning. It's as if, for us, it were impossible to conceive of what never began, what always existed. Hence arises the unconscious need to imagine a God before, a force that preceded even God himself. But here lies the Christian paradox. God is the uncaused cause, the beginning without a beginning, the Alpha without a before, and yet he became flesh in time, in Christ. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. John 1:14. Eternity entered time. The one without beginning was born to save us. Notice, the search for a before God is not an intellectual necessity, but an emotional flight from the scandal of absolute eternity. The human heart fears what it cannot control, what it cannot limit, what it cannot comprehend. So it creates stories, possibilities, myths to protect itself, to try to tame the mystery. And even neuroscience confirms how our brain struggles to grasp the infinite, how we tend to anthropomorphize the divine, to reduce God to the molds of our human experiences, to make him in our image and not the other way around. That's why God's eternity is not a problem to be solved, but a space for worship, surrender, and rest. God had no beginning and will have no end. And in the midst of this unfathomable abyss, there you are, loved, known, sustained by him. Hear the biblical image, so powerful, so firm, so unshakable. He is the rock. His works are perfect. Deuteronomy 32:4. The rock does not move, does not evolve, does not transform. The rock remains. Such is the God of the Bible. While all other gods crumbled with time, while all systems collapsed, while all narratives unraveled, he remained. What seemed like a limitation, a changeless, unvarying, unchanging God, is in fact our greatest spiritual security. Because if he changes, if he evolves, if he adapts, then we cannot trust, we cannot rest, we cannot surrender our lives. But he is the rock. He does not change. He remains. So perhaps it's time to stop seeking roots beyond the rock, to stop looking for foundations in other philosophies, other systems, other beliefs, and simply build your life upon it. Abandon the Gnostic anxiety of discovering prior gods, of finding more hidden mysteries, of accessing more primal revelations. There are none. Nothing exists beyond the I Am. He is. He always was. He always will be. And perhaps this is the truth your soul has always known, but never managed to rest in, until now. There comes a moment when the search must cease, not because the questions are exhausted, not because the mysteries are fully unveiled, but because the soul finally finds rest. Perhaps you've walked for years, decades, trying to understand, to reconcile, to fill that silent, painful space within you. The feeling that perhaps there was something or someone greater, older, more powerful than the God you learned to believe in. Perhaps you feared that your faith was just a faint echo of ancient religions, a fragile shadow of long-forgotten deities. But now, listen with a surrendered heart, with an exposed soul to the words Isaiah proclaimed, not as an argument, not as a theory, but as a definitive declaration, an eternal anchor. Before me, no God was formed, nor will there be one after me. Isaiah 43:10. None before, none after. Only he, only the I Am, only the one who is, from everlasting to everlasting. And perhaps now you realize that the silent spiritual pain, that unvoiced anguish, is finally being soothed. No, you no longer need to fear that your faith is just a worn-out reflection of past mythologies. No, you no longer need to carry the suffocating weight of wondering if there was a God before the God of the Bible. Because the eschatological truth is simple, powerful and definitive. There was not, there is not, and there will not be a God before or after the God of the Bible. He is, he was, and he always will be. He is the eternal rock, the unshakable foundation, the presence that sustains all things and will never be removed. Isaiah also said that the remnant would be like the oak and the terebinth, which when cut down still retain their stump. Isaiah 6:13. Such is divine revelation. Even when attacked, contested, or forgotten by some, it remains rooted since before time. Like the oak, like the tree that, even wounded, does not lose its roots. Such is the Word. Such is the God who calls you, who sees you, who knows you deeply. And now, the invitation is not to search more, not to chase new systems, new philosophies, new answers. The invitation is to rest, to repose, to trust in the I Am. Because he is, was, and always will be before and after all things. Breathe deeply, feel the relief, the weight dissolving, the anxiety fading, the peace settling in, silent but firm, like the eternal rock that sustains all things, including you. And perhaps now you realize that you no longer need to go further, no longer need to search elsewhere, because he is already here. He always has been. He always will be. May this word be not just a concept, but a spiritual experience, an intimate reconciliation, a silent certainty. The God you believe in had no beginning, will have no end, and will never be replaced. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen.